So that's what I was going to say about searching for the outcome or the adverse effect. I have concentrated on Medline and Embase, but I want to emphasize very strongly that there's more to life than Medline and Embase, and there are many other sources out there which are relevant for searching for adverse effects. So, for example, we've had bibliographical databases with Medline and Embase, but there's other bibliographical databases, firstly, such as Biosis Previews, CINAR Plus, Derwent Drug File, etc. There's grey literature sources, such as reports and conferences, trial registries and industry registries, which are increasingly have the results of trials contained within them. There's the regulatory data that's worth looking at, especially I think the US Food and Drug Administration website is worth a look. Hand searching, particularly of conferences that are particularly related to your topic. Citation searching can be good. If you find a key paper, you can find out who's referenced it, particularly if that key paper is getting a little bit old now. Contacting experts is very useful for retrieving adverse effects data. This can be particularly so when there's been a publication, and because tends to be a focus on the primary outcome, so the effectiveness, and the adverse effects tend to be secondary. They sometimes don't get into the publication, which has a restriction, a word limit restriction. And when you contact the authors, they might have a lot of data available that they just didn't publish. Contacting industry can be another useful source, such if your intervention is, for example, a drug or a device. And reference lists, which by that I mean reference lists of the studies that you find that are relevant, but also it could be related systematic reviews. You might want to look through their reference lists as well. So lots and lots of different sources that can be relevant for adverse effects reviews. Now, we had to think about this, and we thought, well, what sources are the best? Which ones retrieve the most relevant records? So for a review that we did on glitazones and fractures in type 2 diabetes, we actually searched over 60 different sources. This is beyond what we usually do for a systematic review. We used the intervention, the glitazone terms, and the outcome, the fracture terms, the adverse effect terms, but we didn't search on diabetes for reasons that I mentioned earlier. And we used multiple text words and indexing. So from those 60 sources, well, it was over 60 sources, I'd like to test to see what you think, which source, well, which database do you think retrieved the highest number of relevant records for this review on fracture and glitazones? So it's over to the poll again. Do you think it was A, Medline, B, Embase, C, Science Citation Index, or D, any other? Over to you, Chris.
Okay, thanks everybody. So that poll's now live for you to answer. Okay. Just give you a few moments to send your answers over. Okay. So we've got answers have come into. I'm going to share those results again. I don't know, so if you can see that, I'm hoping that other people were able to see that poll results. But Sue, I'm assuming you still can't see that. I think maybe it's a two-screen thing. But shall I read those out for you?
Yes, please.
Okey-doke. So top answer is Embase. 55% of people said Embase, and then tied in second place Medline and SCI, and then 5% at other.
Right. So the answer that you've all been waiting for is actually Science Citation Index. And I have to say, if I had been voting, I would have got it wrong. Before I did this, obviously, not when I'd got the results. But so yeah, I was quite surprised that it was Science Citation Index. And this was followed by Biosis Previews. But third and fourth were Embase and Medline. But bear in mind, this is out of 60 sources. So Embase and Medline still did well. But they didn't retrieve the highest number of relevant records. And this is independent of the type of search strategy you use. The green indicates the number of references that I identified with my search strategy, and that the purple is the records that I didn't retrieve with my search strategy that were actually contained on the database. So it's independent of my search strategy. Science Citations Index still performed the best. Another thing to consider, though, when measuring the performance of a database or source is the number needed to read, or it's the inverse of the precision, so it's similar to the precision. And as you can see from this, Science Citation Index performs quite well. Obviously, you want a lower number needed to read, because this means you're getting less irrelevant records for every relevant record. So say Science Citation Index still performs quite well there. Right, this is my last quiz. I'm always interested to find out what people think, because I think hindsight is a wonderful thing. So I think a systematic review that searched Medline, Embase, Cochrane Central and reference checking is quite standard and not bad. So what percentage of papers would we have missed in this glitter zone review if instead of searching the 60 plus sources that we searched, we just searched Medline, Embase, Central and carried out reference checking? A, 25%, B, 8%, C, 57%, or D, 0%? Over to you, Chris.
Righto, so I've just launched that poll now. I'll give you all a second. Just a few more seconds. I see your percentages come in live actually, so it's interesting to watch as people change their minds. Right, okay, so I'll close the poll again. Here's the results for everybody. So Sue, we have 60% of people said, oh, okay, this is going to be quite complicated for me to say this in this way. Okay, top answer at 60% was answer A, 25%. Second answer, a quarter of people, 25% said 8%, answer B. 10% of people said 0, answer D, and just 5% of people said answer C, 57%.
Right, but interesting stuff. It was actually, unfortunately in lots of different ways, not because it means that we didn't get it right today, but because it means that we have to search wider. It was actually 57% C, so we would have missed 57% of the references that we included in this review if we had only searched Medline, Embase, Central and reference checked. And again, this is independent to a certain extent of the search strategy that we used, because even when looking at what was available on these databases, if we're just limited to these 3 databases and reference checking, we would have still missed 45%. So nearly half the records weren't even available on these sources. Another important thing to look at when assessing databases is where you're getting your unique records. And we did actually look at this for the glitter zone review. And the highest number of unique records were actually from the JSK registry, so the industry registry, where 10 unique records were found in this database that weren't contained in any of the other 59 plus sources. So I think that demonstrates the value of industry registries, at least in this case study. So overall, there was around 10 sources that were needed to be searched. It's better than 60, but still 10 sources that we needed to search in order to identify all the included references within this systematic review. And even if you count whether the relevant references were available, so this is taking out the search strategy element, it's still 5 sources needed to be searched. Now that was a case study with a drug intervention. This is another case study, much smaller case study with a medical device. And in this instance, we only searched 10 databases plus reference checking, contacting authors, industry, and using an automated current awareness service. Again, using a sensitive search with lots of text words and indexing. And for this, citation index was joint first for the number of included references that it retrieved. But say there was a lot less databases evaluated in this instance. And the minimum combination was still quite high. As you can see, included industry, science citation index, Embase, central, etc. So, and that was to retrieve the included records in this one case study of a medical device. I've already touched upon the importance of unpublished data by talking about industry data and registries, but I wanted to emphasize it more because with adverse effects, I think unpublished studies are much more important than with effectiveness reviews. And this is because there's a lot of more unpublished studies contain adverse effects data. So if you compare the proportion of unpublished studies with adverse effects data against those published studies with adverse effects data, it's almost double, contain any information on adverse effects. And this even holds true when you look at the same study with its unpublished version and its published version. The published version is much less likely to contain any adverse effects data for the same study. So the information's there, which is why I mentioned about contacting authors. Unpublished data is not just more likely to contain adverse effects data, it's more likely to contain more information about the adverse effects and higher numbers of adverse effects. And more types of adverse effects are reported in unpublished than published versions of the same study. Current practice with unpublished data, we looked at 348 reviews of adverse effects from 2014, so not quite current, but close. And we found that 39% actually searched specifically for unpublished data and mentioned it in their reporting, so it might actually be slightly higher. And we found that half of these reviews were actually successful in identifying unpublished study data for inclusion, and because they searched for published data first, we're probably talking about unique unpublished data. So, the most successful sources were clinicaltrials.gov, which, as I say, the registries are increasingly contain results, contacting authors, and searching conferences. That's not to say that other sources that weren't used might be useful.